They say you know your worth when the company starts to panic the second you take a sick day. Well, mine sent 4 Slack messages, 2 emails, and a junior developer to bang on my apartment door when I was out with the flu. That's how critical I'd become to TechVantage solutions. Not that they ever said it out loud. I'm Austin Rodriguez, 58 years old, and I'd been their senior systems architect for 12 years. Started there when cloud computing was still a buzzword, and most companies were running on mainframes held together with prayer and duct tape. I was their secret weapon, which is just corporate code for do everything, take no credit, and don't ask questions. You ever build something from scratch with your own hands? Watched it save the company from going under, only to have it rolled out under someone else's name like you were a ghost in the server room? That was Tuesday for me, every damn Tuesday for 12 years. TechVantage ran like a country club dressed in startup casual wear. Friday meetings were contests to see who could say synergy the loudest while showing off charts made by interns. The folks with legacy connections got corner offices, everyone else got open concept desk space and motivational posters about innovation. I sat near the windows, behind the guy who thought refactoring was something you did to avoid taxes. My workspace was organized chaos. 3 monitors, 2 whiteboards covered in system diagrams, and 1 coffee-stained notebook that contained more company secrets than the CEO's diary. I didn't do small talk. I did solutions. Back in my Navy days, we had a saying, fix it right the first time, or fix it again under fire. That mentality served me well in the civilian world. I built the disaster recovery system that saved us during the 2019 data center fire, the compliance framework that got us through 3 federal audits without a scratch, the integration layer that made our legacy systems talk to modern APIs like they were old friends catching up. My reward? A $50 gift card to Olive Garden and a team lunch that got canceled twice before someone finally forgot about it. That's when I stopped hoping for recognition and started focusing on documentation. Every system I touched, every line of code I wrote, every architecture decision I made, I kept records. Call it military training, but I logged everything. Timestamps, version histories, email threads, even photos of whiteboard sketches. Good thing too, because the reorg came like a heart attack, sudden, painful, and followed by a lot of people pretending everything was fine. It started with the usual corporate speak, flattening the hierarchy, modernizing leadership, empowering the next generation. Translation: the CEO's daughter needed a job that sounded impressive on LinkedIn. Isabella Parker, 28 years old, fresh from some executive leadership program at a resort in Arizona. Her qualifications: an MBA from a school that costs more than most people's houses, and a summer internship at a consulting firm that specialized in telling companies what their own employees already knew. They announced her at the all hands like she was the second coming. We're excited to bring fresh strategic vision to our infrastructure division, CEO Maya Parker beamed, standing beside Isabella, who wore a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Isabella would be taking over operational oversight for systems architecture. That was me. I was systems architecture, every framework, every protocol, every piece of infrastructure that kept TechVantage running. I'd built it, maintained it, and improved it for over a decade. But now I reported to Isabella. First meeting, she showed up 12 minutes late eating a protein bar. Didn't open her laptop, just sat there scrolling through her phone while I walked through our system dependencies and current projects. She interrupted twice. Once to ask if our back end was AI ready, and again to tell me she didn't need me to think, just execute. Execute. Like 12 years of enterprise architecture was just hitting the enter key. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste copper and kept talking. The real trouble started the next week. My access to production systems got restructured for security purposes. Not revoked, just limited. I could read documentation but couldn't deploy updates. Could monitor logs but couldn't make changes. When I asked IT about it, they said it was part of the new organizational security protocols. When I asked for the written policy, they stopped returning my calls. That's when I started paying closer attention to our shared repositories. Isabella had been busy. She'd created a new folder labeled Parker Innovation Framework and filled it with documents I recognized immediately. my disaster recovery protocols, my compliance frameworks, my integration methodologies, every diagram, every flowchart, every technical specification I'd spent years perfecting. But now they all had Isabella's name in the header. She hadn't just stolen my work, she'd wholesale copied it, keeping my variable naming conventions, my comment styles, even the typo in the database schema where I'd written efficiency instead of efficiency. It was like she'd photocopied my homework and handed it in with her name on top. I stared at my screen for a long time. Then I did something I should have done years earlier. I opened my personal laptop and started making phone calls. The first call was to my old Navy buddy who'd gone into corporate law after his service. He listened to my situation and gave me the name of an intellectual property specialist in downtown Denver. Second call was to that lawyer. "Bring everything you have," she said. Documentation, timestamps, code samples, emails, everything. See, here's what Isabella and the executive team didn't understand about how I worked. Those systems I'd built for TechVantage, most of the foundational work had been developed at home, on my own time, using my own equipment. Company policy said anything created with company resources belonged to them. But the original prototypes, the core algorithms, the foundational architecture, all of that came from my home lab, and I had the documentation to prove it. That weekend, I spread everything across my dining room table. Git commits with timestamps going back 8 years. Email threads with vendors discussing requirements. Photos of my whiteboard at home where I'd sketched out the first disaster recovery flowcharts. Even old blog posts where I'd discussed some of the architectural concepts before TechVantage had implemented them. My wife looked at the organized chaos and shook her head. "You've been planning for this day for years, haven't you?" "Not planning," I said. "Just being careful. Navy taught me to document everything and trust nobody's memory." Monday morning, I sat in the IP lawyer's office while she reviewed my files. Sarah Morgan, no relation to anyone at the company, was the kind of attorney who smiled when she found weaknesses in opposing cases, and she was smiling a lot. "Do you have a non-disclosure agreement covering these early prototypes?" she asked. "No. Company policy only covered work done on site with company resources. These were all developed independently." "And you can prove the timeline of development?" I opened my laptop and showed her. Home network logs going back 6 years, personal email chains with hosting providers, time-stamped photos of notebook sketches from 2018, even comments in my personal GitHub repository discussing optimization strategies that later became core to TechVantage's infrastructure. "We should file provisional patents immediately," she said. 3 of them, covering the core systems they're now claiming as proprietary innovations. So I did. Filed them on a Wednesday evening from my home office while my wife made dinner and asked how my day went. I told her it was getting better. Back at work, Isabella was in full peacock mode. She'd started holding innovation sessions where she presented my architectures to executives who nodded along like they understood what a database cluster actually did. She renamed my monitoring system Parker Scope, called my backup protocols Isabella's Resilience Suite, even had marketing create slides about her visionary approach to enterprise stability for upcoming client presentations. I watched it all happen with the patience of someone who'd spent 6 years in the Navy learning that the best revenge is served systematically and with proper documentation. The junior developer, Caleb Thompson, started asking me questions that made it clear he'd noticed the discrepancies. "Hey Austin, this Parker framework documentation looks a lot like the notes you gave me last year. Same variable names, same comment style. Weird coincidence, right?" I just smiled. Programming patterns tend to repeat across the industry. But Caleb wasn't stupid. He'd been watching me work for 2 years. He knew my coding style, my documentation habits, my architectural preferences. When Isabella started presenting her innovations, he saw right through it. The confrontation I'd been expecting finally came on a Thursday in November. HR called me in for what they labeled a calendar clarification meeting. Corporate speak for "we're about to end your career." Grace Morgan from HR was there, along with Isabella and Owen Wilson, the CTO who'd hired me 12 years earlier. All 3 wore expressions like they'd caught me selling company secrets to foreign governments. "We've been reviewing some irregularities in your schedule," Grace said, scrolling through something on her tablet. Multiple entries labeled legal consultation, IP review, and patent research. These weren't approved through proper channels. Isabella leaned forward with fake concern. "We just want to ensure there's no conflict of interest. Some of these meetings suggest you might be sharing proprietary information with outside firms. Owen stayed quiet, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He knew what I'd built. He'd signed off on every major architecture decision I'd made over the past decade. "Are you asking if I've been meeting with patent lawyers about my own work?" I said calmly. "We're asking if you've been discussing TechVantage systems with external parties," Grace replied carefully. I looked at all three of them. Isabella was trying to look stern and authoritative. Grace was reading from whatever script HR had prepared. Owen was staring at his hands like he wished he was anywhere else. "Austin," Isabella said, leaning back in her chair, "we know you've been meeting with competitors. This is your last day." The room went quiet. I could hear the air conditioning humming and someone's phone buzzing on the table. I stood up slowly, straightened my jacket, and looked directly at Isabella. "You might want to check with your legal department before you make that official." Then I walked out. The termination email arrived 2 hours later. Violation of confidentiality protocols, unauthorized external communications, effective immediately. They sent building security to escort me out like I was some kind of corporate spy instead of a guy reclaiming his own intellectual property. I packed my personal items, coffee mug, family photos, that notebook full of 12 years of system diagrams, while Isabella watched from her glass office. At the elevator, she couldn't resist one final power play. She walked over with that practiced executive smile. "No hard feelings, Austin. You're just not leadership material. Never were." I turned around and looked her in the eye. "You're absolutely right about one thing, Isabella. There won't be any hard feelings." The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in 12 years, I was free. 72 hours later, the cease and desist letters arrived like precision-guided missiles. Certified mail to CEO Maya Parker, the board of directors, the legal department, and every major client using TechVantage's infrastructure services. Each letter was surgical in its precision. It detailed exactly which systems belonged to me, which patents I now held, and what continued use of my intellectual property without proper licensing would cost them. My lawyer had crafted them like legal poetry, polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. The first domino fell within 6 hours. Dataflow Logistics, TechVantage's second-largest client, called in a panic. Their entire supply chain management system ran on my disaster recovery framework. When their legal department saw the patent numbers and realized they might be using contested intellectual property, they froze their entire deployment. "We need immediate clarification on licensing," their attorney told TechVantage. "Until this is resolved, we're suspending all system updates." By Thursday, 2 more clients had put their contracts on hold pending legal review. TechVantage's stock started sliding as word spread through industry channels that there might be fundamental IP problems with their core infrastructure. I watched it unfold from my home office, monitoring industry news sites and LinkedIn posts like a general tracking enemy movements. Former colleagues started reaching out with carefully worded messages. "Hey Austin, heard about the situation. Hope everything works out. Crazy times at the office. Miss having you around to keep the systems running. Isabella's been in meetings with lawyers all week. Looks stressed." I didn't respond to any of them. This wasn't about workplace gossip or taking sides. This was about ownership, documentation, and the systematic application of legal pressure. Meanwhile, TechVantage's legal department was having what my Navy buddies would call an all-hands-on-deck emergency. They pulled every contract, every employment agreement, every piece of documentation related to my work over the past 12 years. What they found wasn't pretty. Most of my foundational work had been done before comprehensive IP agreements were in place. The company's legal framework had evolved over time, but my core systems predated their most restrictive policies. Owen Wilson, the CTO, found himself in an impossible position. He'd been there when I developed most of these systems. He knew the timeline, he'd approved the architectures. Now he was being asked to testify that somehow Isabella had independently created identical solutions. Isabella, meanwhile, was discovering that being the face of stolen innovation came with responsibilities she hadn't anticipated. Clients wanted technical explanations she couldn't provide. Developers asked implementation questions about systems she'd never actually built. Her innovation sessions became exercises in deflection and corporate doublespeak. The patent filings were public record now. industry publications started picking up the story. TechVantage faces IP dispute over core infrastructure ran in 3 different trade magazines within a week. My LinkedIn profile started getting attention, connection, requests from competitors, recruiters, even journalists wanting to understand the technical details of the dispute. I accepted the connections but declined all interviews. Let the legal process do the talking. The real pressure came when TechVantage's biggest client, Continental Manufacturing, demanded a meeting. They'd built their entire production scheduling system on what Isabella was calling the Parker framework. If that framework was legally contested, their entire operational structure was at risk. We need absolute certainty about the provenance of these systems, Continental's chief technology officer told Maya Parker during a heated conference call. If there's any question about ownership, we'll need to find alternative solutions. Continental represented 30% of TechVantage's annual revenue. Losing them would be catastrophic. That's when the settlement discussions started. TechVantage's lawyers reached out to mine with what they called preliminary conversations about resolving this misunderstanding. My lawyer's response was simple. There's no misunderstanding. Our client owns the intellectual property. Your client is using it without license. We can discuss licensing terms. The negotiations stretched over 7 months. TechVantage's lawyers tried every angle they could think of. Work-for-hire agreements that didn't actually cover the disputed systems. Collaborative development claims that fell apart when they couldn't produce any collaborative documentation. They even suggested I'd abandon the intellectual property by not filing patents earlier, until my lawyer pointed out that there's no legal requirement to file patents within any specific time frame. But the documentation I'd kept was bulletproof. Every timestamp matched. Every development milestone was logged. Every iteration was tracked from my home lab to production deployment. The Navy had taught me to document everything, and 12 years later, that habit was paying off in ways I'd never imagined. During the legal process, TechVantage's internal situation got worse. Isabella's credibility evaporated when developers realized she couldn't answer basic questions about her systems. 2 senior engineers quit when they figured out what had happened. Caleb Thompson, the junior dev who'd noticed the discrepancies, started looking for other jobs. The company's stock dropped 8.5% as the IP dispute dragged on and clients continued to delay major implementations. Industry analysts were questioning TechVantage's technical leadership and long-term viability. Isabella was quietly moved to a strategic planning role, corporate code for "we can't fire the CEO's daughter, but we need her away from anything technical." She stopped attending developer meetings and started focusing on market research and competitive analysis. Maya Parker, the CEO, found herself personally involved in damage control. She'd built TechVantage's reputation on technical excellence, and now that reputation was crumbling because of her daughter's actions. The turning point came when Continental Manufacturing formally notified TechVantage that they were beginning to evaluate alternative platforms. Other clients started asking similar questions. The financial pressure was becoming unsustainable. That's when TechVantage's board of directors decided it was time to settle. The final settlement was $875,000, plus ongoing licensing fees for continued use of my frameworks. Not the biggest payout you'll ever hear about, but more than fair for what amounted to one man's intellectual property claim against a mid-sized tech company. More importantly, TechVantage had to provide public acknowledgement of my role in developing their core infrastructure systems. The press release was carefully worded corporate speak, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. TechVantage Solutions acknowledges the significant contributions of former senior systems architect Austin Rodriguez to the development of key infrastructure frameworks currently utilized in our platform offerings. We are pleased to have reached a mutually beneficial licensing agreement that ensures continued innovation and client service excellence. Translation: we got caught using someone else's work and had to pay for it. Isabella's fate was sealed long before the settlement was finalized. The board couldn't fire the CEO's daughter outright, but they could make her position irrelevant. She was transferred to business development and strategic partnerships, a role that sounded important but had no actual authority over technical decisions. Last I heard, she was helping companies develop digital transformation strategies for problems she'd never actually solved. Her LinkedIn profile still listed her as an innovation leader and systems architecture visionary. The industry has a long memory, though. People talk. Maya Parker, the CEO, survived but took a significant hit to her credibility. The board made it clear that family hiring decisions would be subject to additional oversight going forward. She announced her retirement 18 months later, citing a desire to pursue new challenges in the nonprofit sector. Owen Wilson, the CTO, kept his job but had to rebuild his entire infrastructure team. Caleb Thompson left for a startup in Boulder. 2 other senior developers followed within 6 months. TechVantage went from having one of the most stable technical teams in Denver to being known for turnover and uncertainty. As for me, I used the settlement money to start Rodriguez Systems Consulting. Nothing fancy, just me, a home office, and a philosophy of giving credit where it's due. My first client was Dataflow Logistics, the same company that had frozen their TechVantage contract when my patent surfaced. They needed someone to modernize their supply chain system without depending on contested intellectual property. We'd rather work directly with the guy who built what we were using anyway, their CTO told me. Within 6 months, I had 5 clients, all of them companies that had gotten tired of paying TechVantage's licensing fees for frameworks I'd originally developed. Turns out there's a market for working with the actual architect instead of the middleman. I hired Caleb Thompson as my first employee. Kid had integrity, which is rarer in this business than technical skill. First thing I told him was that if he built something, his name went on it. No exceptions, no shared credit unless he actually collaborated, no corporate theft of individual contributions. Really? He asked. That's not how most places work. Most places don't know the difference between management and ownership, I said. We do. The consulting business grew steadily. We specialized in legacy system modernization for companies that needed real expertise instead of PowerPoint presentations. Our clients were mostly mid-sized businesses that had been burned by larger consulting firms promising revolutionary solutions and delivering rebranded existing tools. My wife says I'm happier than I've been in years. She's probably right. There's something satisfying about building things with your own name on them, working with clients who value experience over marketing buzz, and sleeping well, knowing nobody's going to steal your work and call it innovation. TechVantage still exists, but they're a shadow of what they were when I left. The IP dispute scared off several potential acquisition offers. Their technical reputation never fully recovered. They're surviving, but they're not thriving. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven TechVantage for what they did. The answer is no, because forgiveness implies they tried to make things right instead of trying to bury the evidence and silence the victim. But I'm not bitter. I'm grateful. They forced me to take control of my own career, my own work, and my own future. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly the push you needed to build something better. The patents I filed are still active. Every time TechVantage deploys a system based on my frameworks, they pay licensing fees to Rodriguez Systems Consulting. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's a monthly reminder that intellectual property belongs to the people who create it, not the companies that employ them. These days, when young engineers ask me for advice, I tell them the same things my Navy commander told me 35 years ago. Document everything, trust but verify, and always have a backup plan. Because you never know when the company that claims your family decides you're expendable. But if you've done your homework, kept clean records, and understood your legal rights, you might just discover that you were never really their employee. You were always the owner of something they couldn't live without. Thanks for listening. If you're dealing with something similar, remember that justice isn't always immediate, but it's usually available if you're patient and systematic about pursuing it. The law protects people who protect themselves with proper documentation. And if you ever need help modernizing legacy systems without the corporate politics and stolen credit, you know where to find me. Rodriguez Systems Consulting is always looking for clients who value honest work over fancy presentations. Hope your story ends as well as mine did.